I think I'm on the standing between you guys and the food trucks, and I also stand between John and his jet. So he's eager. So.
Well, there were two people in the room until they announced beer and wine was in here, and the room filled up.
I don't know who these idiots are talking up here, but it's free beer. So, John, it's great to have you here. Great to have you back. Thank you. And I don't know where to start. I mean, you retired in December, and you've been busy as heck. What's up? I mean, you're going off to Paris tonight, then off to India. You're ambassador for President Macron, and you're a special ambassador for President Modi. I mean, you're working on an intergalactic basis. I'm super impressed. Yeah. So.
Well, Jamie, I'm doing what you started to do a long time ago. I believe that technology can change the world.
Sit on your ass and make money?
I haven't mastered that yet.
That's my MO. I mean, no one's figured it out.
I don't buy that at all. But at Cisco, we had a chance to change the world with the internet, and It was tremendous and exciting for our investors, for the customers, et cetera. I'm going to try to do that again. I'm going to focus this time on startups, startup nations, and startup worlds. I think that's where all the job creation will come. These will be spatial purpose focus. Each one of them, I'll try to be the number one and number two player in each category. No surprise to you from that perspective.
Yeah.
I will focus on job creation. So not only am I going to try to grow the startups at 50% per year, I will try to grow them at 50% plus per year in headcount increase. They will be spread across the nation, try to do it in as many states as I can. And at the same time, do this on a global basis in France and in India, working very closely with Prime Minister Modi in India and with President Macron in France. So it's about changing the world, doing it one more time. You and I know how to scale companies.
Yeah.
And I intend to do this and have a lot of fun and maybe make a little money in the process.
That's a hell of an opening, isn't it? We've got a lot to work with there. All right, so, gosh, what do we start? Your portfolio, the construction's across the country. It's important to have that.
Yes.
What do you look for in the entrepreneur, and explain the sort of mentoring role that you provide to them?
Well, it's one of the key issues, and this is something that I think if we're really going to scale this across our country, and let's start with the assumption, Jamie. You remember 3 years ago at your conference, I said 40% of the large companies are going to disappear. Completely disappear. Digitization is going to destroy 30 to 50% of what we do in our jobs. So the large companies' headcount will decrease. If you don't get startups going at 3 to 4 times the current rate of formation, we're going to have a huge employment problems and income problems 5 to 10 years from now. So what I look for in these companies is a chance to be a role model for how this could occur in the U.S. I look for a market in transition, so it's the classic approach, digitization, IoT, AI everywhere, and automation, the ability when the physical and virtual lines blur, security across the fabric, doing everything from drones to defensive drones to social media capability, to solving world hunger, with crickets being the next form of protein. Great economic issue.
You think Mike will eat the crickets?
I think not only Mike will eat the crickets, I think you will eat them.
Oh, you got them?
I just happen to have one here.
All right,
and as you know, I'm a huge.
Can you bring me a beer? I mean, beer and crickets.
Better back up the beer. Bring in 2 beers, please.
Okay, 2 beers.
And Jamie, this is the cleanest form of protein
we didn't warn me.
And we at the top restaurant, which Gary Gaba owns in San Francisco, Cezanne's, they served a 7-course cricket dinner that Fortune wrote about. Right. And your kids are going to love it. Cleanest form of protein you can get. Solve world hunger. These will be the next lobsters.
Tawny, 2 beers, please. Thank you.
They're salty. They're like a potato chip. Now, the fun thing is, I know Jamie wouldn't be able to ask me a question for a minute. So I showed him the other device we're doing. And this is the only secure phone in the world that the nation states cannot break into. And basically, you can take your iPhone and shortly your Android. It's from a company called Privero. And this is what you'll see defense agencies around the world and others work on.
Just 2 is fine.
The programmability on the back.
You better come
the ability to attach devices.
Don, would you care for
completely change the world.
Union Jack, IPA, or
I'll take as long as it's cold.
IPA will get you ready for India. Yeah. All right.
So Both these companies will be number one in their industry, I believe, and
Oh,
they're
gosh, did
just
he
two
do
of the
this
12
too?
I'm in.
Okay. 2 of 12, all right.
Yeah.
So, France, we just met a gentleman, Hugo, from the French Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Yes.
President Macron's very excited. But tell us, I mean, we all love France, but what's special in your mind about the composition of France and the change there? What clicked there? What are their natural advantages that they're starting to utilize to kick off the innovation economy? What's changed, and what are their competitive advantages that you think they can grow?
So a series of questions. If you watch what got me attracted to France, my business friends in France said, we're changing, and a socialistic government's going to change, and I said, no way. I'll come and visit you, I'll have dinner with you, I love the people, but no way I'm ever going to invest in France and believe this is the future. At the Consumer Electronics Show, France was the number one country behind the U.S. in the world with 66 startups 4 sessions ago, 3 years and a couple months. They went from 66 to 274 in 3 years. They are the same startups going to Consumer Electronics Show that we have here. So their startup engine started to occur. Then their government, and it kills me being a Republican, it's like Clinton did in the 90s on the internet, got the idea this could change. They had the courage to announce a strategic partnership with Cisco and to be able to say we will become a startup nation. Macron and I, when he was economic minister, were in front of the press saying, here's where it's going to go. Hollande, the president, basically stood up and said, I'm going to digitize the country. We're going to grow our GDP 1 to 3 points faster. We're going to add 1.5 million jobs. We're going to do smart cities. We're going to become the startup nation in Europe. And I was his wingman on getting that message out, attracting capital into France. And it is happening. If there's one nation you're going to bet on in Europe, it is France, and Macron is as good as you see. I've lectured with him at business schools, etc. On the other hand, Modi, halfway around the world, they could not be different as night and day in terms of their backgrounds. They're both unbelievably good people. And Modi is going to do this for 1.3 billion people, digitize his country, 2 to 4 points more GDP growth, 1.2 million jobs a month, 100 smart cities.
Wow. All right, so maybe we pause on France, and then we'll go over to India. So 1.2 million jobs, when you have zero population growth, that's a significant dent. Well, India is obviously a much different population scenario. Is it a regulation? Is it a relaxation of the labor laws? Has that been the major factor? Or is it a availability of capital or tax credits? What's kind of triggered it, or is it a kind of we're going to take our foot off your neck in terms of overall policy?
Regulations. This is something, and this will hurt my Republican and Democratic friends in Washington to hear. They did what the U.S. should have done. They moved in 12 months faster than the U.S. moves in 15 years. It took us 15 years to do tax reform. They literally have moved in terms of ease of doing business. They've moved in terms of availability of capital. They have unlimited visas for high-tech graduates from anywhere in the world outside the EU. You give them an issue, and in 6 months they fixed it.
Yeah.
And it took me 15 years, as you know, on lobbying on tax reform to finally see that go through last year. Their leaders became the standouts for it. Their business group, MEDEF, became the champions. All political parties got behind it. They've got great engineering schools.
Great mathematicians.
They were ready as a country. You could sense it.
Yeah.
And our biggest backers were the media, which shocked us because we thought they'd be critical. I asked the media with Macron sitting right beside me where you are, and they were asking some tough questions, and I stood up and I said, I'm going to ask you all a question. How many of you think France can become the startup nation in Europe and lead on innovation?
Right.
And Macron looked at me and I hope you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And 80% of the room raised their hand, and that was 2.5 years ago.
Well, that's true.
So it is amazing what they're doing. My point, there's no entitlement in startups and job creation. The U.S. is the lowest startup formation that we've had during my business career, and France went up 400% from 120 startups per year high tech to 486 in 3.5 years. India's grown at 50% per year. We've got to get our act back together here.
Okay, so France is great. I love it. Look forward to wish I was going with you. I have a conference tomorrow, but
Well, you can come with me, or I can commit your money while I'm there.
okay, all right. Yeah,
That's part of my job.
All right. So India,
Yeah.
1.2 million jobs a month.
A month.
Yeah, so the other night we're sitting there, and one of the statistics was 1 out of 10 citizens in the world or people in the world is an Indian under the age of 25.
That is correct.
So that's, wow, think about it, 1 out of 10.
More than half the population.
Yeah, so it's over 700 million Indians under the age of 25. So that's 1.2 million. Is that enough?
Well, they do 600,000 engineers a year. We only do
Right.
60,000.
Wow.
What you see is a market that's going to develop. I bet on China in 1995 at a time that no one else did, and they thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
I did that with Jiang Zemin, the president. We did joint outsourcing and manufacturing, which was unheard of at that time.
Right.
And we had a tremendous 25-year run in China. That is where India is now.
Yeah.
You're at the front end of the longest run. It will be the fastest growing GDP in the world for the next decade. It will shock people. He has the courage to make the decision on demonetization, the courage to make the decisions on goods and services tax. Everybody criticized him on both. He came through it. He won the election the other day in one of the remote states that is largely a Christian state, and that's a challenge for him.
Yeah.
He won it comfortably.
Right.
So he's going to do it for all 1.3 billion people.
Right.
He is an amazingly good man. He's somebody I trust completely, and he does his own vision and strategy, and then he drives it through. And so I'm invested in India too, so I can commit a little bit of your money while I'm there as well.
Thanks. Pankaj, can you go with them?
Want some more beer or some more crickets?
I know. I don't know if I can afford either.
I don't think I've ever seen Jamie speechless before. I'm having fun. In my new life, I get to do just what I enjoy.
Yeah. Well, tell me about, let's talk about that. Your new life, you're working with your son. He's not here. I wish he was here. John
Yes.
Chambers. And John, I mean, that's special, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
He came out of house. He, before that, was Netflix,
Yeah.
digital marketing before that, Walmart.com,
Man of his
Best
own,
Buy.
merit.
He would never let me help him.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he said, Dad, if you want to do it together, I'm in. So I got lucky.
Yeah.
And
That must be special.
it is special.
Yeah. So,
But the fun part is,
yeah.
I get to do this with my son and over time with my daughter. She builds custom houses. I built about 50 of them in LA and in San Francisco and Palo Alto. But I get to now do this with 12 CEOs, and it'll probably go to 15, that have a great vision and strategy, help them build their teams, help them understand how do you scale, how do you work through the personnel situations, how do you do your first fire of a founder, how do they work through that, how do you go to market in terms of the changes. And it's like grandkids.
Yeah.
I love my grandkids. I have a 5 and a 9-year-old, and I also love very much the startups, and they just are like sponges. They absorb things so quickly. I thought they wouldn't get culture. They all understand culture is a foundation of a great company.
Well, okay. Well, let's go to culture, because I mean, it is the foundation. Describe the Cisco culture and how you had, and how you, as you kept reinventing Cisco, maybe perhaps how the culture evolved over the 20,
Well, part of the
25 years.
culture has always stayed basic. The culture is the same anywhere in the world. I got a question when I was in India saying, John, isn't the culture different in India with 5,000 people in the room than in the U.S.? And you know me, Jamie, I've got a good sense of humor, I think. I got up, I walked over, I pulled off my badge a little bit. I went up to the front row where there was an open seat. I looked at my friend Dave and said, what is different in our culture? So the cameras are supposed to follow me. I think they're missing this. And I pulled off my badge and I turned to him and said, what's different in the culture about changing the world? He said, nothing. Changing the way the world works, lives, learns, and plays? Nothing. What's different in the culture about making innovation happen? He said, nothing. What is different about just doing the right thing? And he said, nothing. And I said, what is it in treating others like you like to be treated about yourself? Nothing. What is it about our culture that we're number one or number two in everything we do? And we do it in a way that is a win-win.
Yeah.
And he said nothing. And so the foundation's always been there,
Yeah.
Jamie. The key is, can you reinvent?
Right.
And this is where we move from one product to two. And my stock went down when we bought switching companies, and they're now $13 billion revenue.
Yeah.
We then moved into video, the
Yeah.
data center. So we constantly reinvent.
Yeah.
And Cisco will be fine as long as we reinvent. And if we don't, we'll get left behind like any other company.
Well, you reinvented various ways, too. You acquired companies, you spun companies out and spun them
Yeah.
back in, you made
We did
venture
things that no
investments.
one's ever done with acquisitions. We did 180 of them. Now it's an accepted way to grow. Back then it wasn't. We do strategic partnerships with Apple and Microsoft. And by the way, most of those have never occurred effectively. And we do spin-ins, as you said, that most companies wouldn't understand how to do. And Pankaj knows this. All 4 of our spin-ins have had 10x returns for our shareholders.
Wow.
So we're willing to take risk, and we've had our failures too.
Yeah.
And that's what the startups can learn from. They can learn the mistakes made, and then you can walk them through the culture. And Jamie, just like you talked about family with tremendous pride, and I know you feel the same way about yours. I have one of my startups. Most of them. I know there's one concern, but I think he'll make it. And the Russian entrepreneur who's now in New York, tremendous, brilliant young man. And he got the vision and strategy piece, and we went through the company, and we talk about twice a week on presentations and how does he evolve. And we talked about how his management team evolves. We talked about the importance of communications, but I didn't think he got culture.
Right.
He came back about 2 months ago, and he said, John, here's what I'm going to present to our employees and our board. I want to run it by you. I was expecting a business case. He went into culture, and I was just amazed. It was better than what I'd done, and he presented to his company. 2 weeks later, one of the employees lost her mother, and he went to her and said, how can I help? I really want to make a difference. What can occur here? And a couple weeks after that, she came back and said, it's the first time I've ever seen a company really, really care.
Yeah.
So we got the culture, and as somebody that believes in culture, and these companies need mentoring much more than they need money. And they need to say, how do you scale and grow, and how do you open markets? If we're really going to do this across our country, we have to do this on a much larger scale. So part of it is getting the money.
Right.
But part of it is really being the coach and the mentor for how these companies scale. And I'm doing that in India. When I travel, I meet with usually 100 of the startups. I'll talk about how do you scale on it. I'll make some of my investments myself there. I'll do the same thing in France.
That's terrific. John, you're writing a book. Tell us a little bit about, a year from now when I bought 1,000 copies to hand out. Well,
2,000 would be better.
2,000
would be better than 1,000.
2,000 makes you a bestseller.
Yes,
as long as you don't
exactly.
buy them on Amazon. I'll buy 2,000, so it'll be a bestseller.
You know this business.
Oh, I do.
All right.
Yeah.
So basically,
you're a bestseller. So your bestseller. What's going to be in your best-selling book?
Well, books were meant to be written after you're dead.
Yeah.
And that's what I told my team when they said you need to write a book. And they just wore me down. The book's going to be the foundation for what I'm going to do in the next chapter of my life, which is all around startups, startup nations, and startup world. It's going to be about leadership and how, as you grow, and how you handle your successes, but also your setbacks and your mistakes, how do you go through that? How do you identify market trends? What are the toughest decisions you make as a leader? What's lonely about the leader? What is leadership like in a digital age? How do you do the acquisitions? How do you think like a dyslexic or a teenager is one of the chapters that we'll deal with. And so really it's a foundation that I hope that business schools will use in terms of saying, this is how you build companies.
So a series of cases or a series of
It will be
stories?
13 chapters.
13 stories.
Each of them will vary from starting off in West Virginia with my home and the values I learned and the challenges we go through to what it's like leading during good times, but also setbacks.
Yeah.
How do you do acquisitions? And now the last part will be written about how do you do successful startups and scale.
Yeah. One of the incredible stories I've heard is about your fishing trip. I'm not just fishing for an invitation, but I am.
Okay.
But you take your entrepreneurs up to Alaska, and I hear it's just an incredible experience of mentoring, team building, interaction, conversation. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of how it came about. And
Sure.
And you seem to light up when you talk about it.
Oh,
too.
I do.
Yeah.
Well, I started 20 years ago taking my top leadership team up to Alaska. And during my time as CEO, our attrition rate on our total company averaged below 5%, and the acquired companies averaged below 4%.
Wow.
And as you know, in this industry, when you acquire, usually the attrition runs 20%. But part of the reason is we built the culture and the tightness, and we brought together very diverse teams in terms of background, gender, everything from sexual orientation, et cetera, on it, very inclusive around the world. And I took those leaders up there for 18 years. As I began to move out of Cisco, and it's Juxta Run now, I began to do this with startups. So we'll take 12 startup CEOs and 12 business executives, some of them from Cisco, some of them friends from others, and all we do is focus on culture, growth, How do you build great companies? And when you're fishing together in a boat out there with grizzly bears not very far away from you, you build relationships and you talk. And the people who came to these events over the 20 years, I think I might have lost one of them.
To a grizzly bear? Or?
Well, that one we didn't want to tell about. You got to be able to control the media.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is there's a unique chance. My favorite picture this last year is normally with grizzly bears, the team together, or the fish that we caught. It was with VJ out of Pin Drop sitting in the water with 3 of the top women leaders in the world. We just finished fishing. I was the 5th person there.
Yeah.
We were talking about culture, gender, inclusion. And you had Rebecca Jacoby talking to him, and you had basically Wendy Barr talking with him. And they were talking about how do you do this. And at a moment in time, the conversation was going so well, and VJ was just absorbing. I went back behind, and I took a picture of here. You've got 4 of them sitting in the water, calmness, and the plane hasn't arrived. And that was my most memorable part of that trip. It's building great young CEOs who are going to scale. And Pindrop, as you know, is probably one of the hottest startups going on in voice authentication and fraud. Yeah,
voice is great. Bobby, you want to come on up and join us? I'm going to welcome Bobby Franklin to the stage. Bobby's the CEO of the National Venture Capital Association. Bobby, great to have you here. Thanks for coming out from Washington. John and I have always been a great advocate of the industry and the NVCA and the role that you play. And we're going to thank you for coming out to join us. You're going to give a talk tomorrow morning on the state of the NVCA, and hopefully many of you will come hear the long version. But one of the things that we're talking about is how do we share this prosperity that we've had in Silicon Valley, elsewhere around the country more? But maybe we stop back and say, kind of, what's the state of the NVCA? And then we'll go that heavier subject about how do we kind of go national.
Well, thanks for having me.
Great to have you, Bobby.
You know, I would say that after listening to John, now that he's a venture capitalist, the future looks bright because we've got folks like him coming into the industry. Just in terms of raw numbers, we'll go over in more detail tomorrow morning. The last year was one of 4 years where we raised over $30 billion to put to work. Last year, over $80 billion were invested. I got to be careful about the numbers because a lot of non-traditional VC money comes in. Now that companies are staying private longer, your Ubers, your Airbnbs, the numbers get skewed because it's still considered a venture-backed company, even though it's been a while since there were true venture dollars going in. You had a 12-year high in terms of the number of first-time funds last year, a little over $3 billion, so that's a good sign, 30-some-odd first-time funds. So I think, you know, if we can get some of the benefits like you're talking about here spread outside the coast, I think it helps entrepreneurs all over the country.
So some of the statistics are, it's not that I was paying close attention, but 7.1 years to an IPO from start, 5.2 years to an M&A exit, 20% of the overall venture capital went to billion-dollar-plus companies, and 56 IPOs last year, and a projection about 100 IPOs this year. I think that was what I read, but anyway, that was all very good.
You don't have to come tomorrow, you just heard the whole speech.
But I was fascinated by it. It's very timely, but I think the question I have is there a good example of somewhere in America outside of Silicon Valley where they got it right? You know, is there a state or a region where you look at that and say, boy, that they really figured out how to kind of make it work, you know, with the universities and R&D and
I would say the one that we use a lot as an example is Ohio. So there are 3 accelerators that are supported by the state, one in Cleveland, one in Columbus, one in Cincinnati. They do a lot of work to help find the entrepreneurs, get them ready to move on. You've now been fortunate, one of my board members, Mark Kwame, who left the Bay Area, who's out there, he's got a fund, probably helps in a larger, you know, size so that folks don't have to travel to the coast, they can stay there. And then more recently, there's the Ohio Innovation Fund, which was raised mostly by the universities being LPs. And so they've got an experienced manager from the Bay Area, but Ohio was home. And so now you can start to see this ecosystem develop.
Where is it? In Columbus? Is that the ecosystem, or is it throughout the state?
I think it's throughout the state and throughout the Midwest. But I think they've taken the right approach, which is to say a startup needs a lot of help at the beginning. Once it gets to a certain size, growth capital will travel, so you don't need to worry about it.
So if someone was able to edit out all the noise of Donald Trump and what was coming out of Washington, and you just looked at the policies of R&D tax credit, capital gains treatment, carried interest treatment, qualified small business, it would look as if the venture business has been treated pretty fairly by the current legislation. Is that a fair assessment?
The tax bill was very fair to the venture industry.
It was almost like God called you up and said, "Bobby, what would you like it to look like?" And you answered.
We worked hard,
But immigration's a problem, though.
you had to start years ahead.
Yeah, okay,
You have to work with Congress. I mean, John's been working on tax reform for 14 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been working on it for many years, and you had to get it in the right place. Immigration is a problem.
Yeah.
You know, everywhere in the world. I was sharing with John before we came up here. 20 years ago, 90% of global venture capital dollars went to U.S. startups. 10 years ago, that number was 81%, and last year it was 54%. Now, the good news is the denominator's gotten bigger. There's capital available. There are people like President Macron, who, by the way, when he was the economic minister, he helped sponsor an NVCA event at CES 4 years ago. And so you can see, you know, kind of where he has been all along. And it's that intentionality of what they want to do. But for some reason, we're not welcoming to the entrepreneurs around the world. They're going to start and grow great companies.
So what's next on your agenda then? You got kind of a win on tax. What are the key issues facing?
We're still going to look for ways to try to make the IPO markets more inviting.
Yeah.
So we did the Jobs Act a few years ago. Question is, what should come next? What's the right regulatory environment so that companies do have an exit opportunity to go on the public markets? I think we've got our hands full. We've been asked by the Securities and Exchange Commission, by the CFTC, to help them think about what to do, how to regulate, what not to regulate when it comes to cryptocurrencies and ICOs. You know, for an industry, obviously that can totally disrupt the VC industry.
Yeah.
And we need to understand what that means. But if a country doesn't get it right, then they're going to go elsewhere.
So Bobby's going to do 2 sessions tomorrow. One is on the state of the venture market, and then later a fireside chat on diversity and inclusion on venture. John, that's something you've been a real leader at Cisco and elsewhere, and you know, what's your take on, or you know, the current environment, how we can be more successful about diversity and inclusion in the venture and in the innovation economy? Are there some observations you have from your experience?
Well, first, at Cisco, you've got to lead by example.
Right.
We did a good job of that at our board. We had 30% of our board female, not because that was a goal. It was just the right thing to do a long time ago. But all of the industries have slowed dramatically. Our generation, Jamie, has failed on solving this problem.
Yeah.
So I think we turn it to the millennials. With the startups that I'm sponsoring, I'm encouraging them strongly, and several of them have already done it, to do one basic thing on diversity, and that is for every open rec, interview at least one woman. And when we did that with my pilot, I always pilot outside the U.S. in case it doesn't work, then other people don't hear about it. In India, we went in 1 year from 23% gender diverse to 34%. And you see the results. And I'm a huge Sheryl Sandberg fan, and I've always been her wingman on many of the issues as she moved. But we have 30 ideas to do this, and that we aren't moving the needle. So we've got to move it. Now, Jamie, to your point earlier, Bobby, I think we're probably in agreement on this. Our startup machine in the U.S. is completely broken.
Yeah.
We cannot deny this. If you view startups, IPOs, as the tip of the iceberg, which run 200 to 240 on the NASDAQ normally, and to your point, barely made 100 this year and barely made 100, didn't make it last year.
Right.
This is broken. And there is no entitlement in this new world. So if we don't get this engine going, as digitization destroys 30 to 40% of your jobs, and you have the large enterprise companies consolidate and automate at the same time, if we don't ramp this startup engine up by a factor of 3 to 4 times, our country's going to be left behind, and you're going to leave Middle America and Southeast America behind. This needs to be a national priority. Probably no one, you've eaten crickets today, but a few of you have eaten frogs. Probably nobody's ever caught frogs. I've caught them. Nobody ever cooks frogs themselves. I've done that, and they eat frogs. But you put them in a pot and you warm them up slowly. They stay there and you cook them. That's what we've done to our startup industry in this country. We have overburdened this with regulation, and we don't understand when countries like France are growing at 4 times our growth rate, and the alarm bells are not going off in Washington. On the immigration issue, when a country like France has unlimited immigration for high-tech people, the alarm bells should be going off. When China, in an average day, starts up 4,000 startups, and grew in the first 5 years of this decade, literally 100%, when we grew 12, and that was when we were growing.
Yeah.
We all have to realize if we don't change this, we've got a huge problem for this country in the future. There'll be no entitlements. So while on the one hand I share Bobby's enthusiasm, we have to redo this. And we have to move very quickly, and government and business and National Venture Capital Association and others have to lead by example. And we've got to have the courage to take risk outside of the valley. I would have given you the example of Texas. I mean, Governor Perry would come up and hunt in California. He was hunting for startups.
Yep.
It is so easy to do business there, and 3 of my 12 startups are in Austin. They just make it so easy for you to move forward. So I'm not an alarmist, but I am very good on market trends. This one's coming at us, and we've got about 5 or 6 years to get our act together, or we miss it. Would you agree?
I would agree, and I can't wait to have you join us in May at our annual meeting, VCs to DC, because that's the message we have to deliver to the policymakers.
All right. Well, Bobby, John, thank you so much for being here. Let's give them a round.